He sits at the top of the world and does not move. Snow falls around him, slow, heavy, the kind that settles rather than drifts, and he does not flinch. Wind presses against his wings, which are old enough to be ragged at the edges, old enough that the leather has gone thin and pale in places, like paper held up to light. His horns are chipped. One is missing its tip. His eyes, when you finally reach him after the long climb, are dulled with age in a way that should not be possible for a creature that cannot die. He could be anywhere. He has lived long enough to have been everywhere. He has the power to destroy entire civilizations. He did once, and those records survive. And yet here he is, motionless, choosing this patch of frozen stone at the peak of the throat of the world, every single day, for thousands of years. The question is not what he is. The question is what he decided to become. Take a slow breath. Find somewhere warm and comfortable. There is no hurry tonight. We have the whole night, and the story we are settling into is a long one, longer than most stories get to be, measured in eras rather than years. It is a story about guilt and transformation, and the strange, lonely work of trying to become better than the thing you were made to be. There is something sitting near the center of this story that I want to hold until we have earned it. It concerns his name, what his name means, and the fact that he chose, in the thousands of years since the worst of what he did, to keep it. When we reach it, and we will, it changes something about everything that came before. But we begin, as all things in the world of Skyrim begin, at the beginning. Before the mountains had names, before there were people to give them names. The world that existed before recorded history in the lore of the Elder Scrolls is called the Merethic era, the time before counting, the age before record. What we know of it has been filtered through legend, through fragmentary texts, through the kind of half-remembered myth that societies preserve because they cannot quite let go of it, even when they are no longer sure what it means. What those legends agree on is this. In the Merethic era, the world belonged to the dragons. Not in a metaphorical sense. Not in the way that we sometimes say a mountain belongs to the wind or an ocean belongs to the storm. The dragons were the dominant force on Tamriel, intelligent, immortal, extraordinarily powerful, and organized under a hierarchy with one figure at its apex. Their language was not merely a form of communication. In the lore of Skyrim, the Thu'um, what people later came to call the Voice, was a form of reality itself. When a dragon spoke a word with true comprehension of its meaning, the world responded. Fire answered. Stone yielded. The Thu'um was the language in which the world had been written, and the dragons read it fluently, and mortals did not. This is important to understand before anything else. The relationship between dragons and the early people of Tamriel was not simply one of predator and prey, though it was that too. It was the relationship between those who understood the fundamental language of reality and those who were not supposed to. The dragon cult that arose in Skyrim during this period was, in its own way, a logical response to that gap. If the dragons spoke the language of creation, then serving them was not unlike worshipping a god. For many Nords of the Merethic era, the line between those two things was not clearly drawn at all, and presiding over all of it, over the dragon cult, over the hierarchy of dragons, over the long age of fire and domination, was Alduin, the eldest, the World Eater. In the dragon tongue, a name that carries the weight of destroyer, devourer, master of all. He was the firstborn of all the Dove, and he claimed that his dominion was not merely political. He claimed that his authority came from the divine. He positioned himself not as a king, but as a god, as the first and greatest of Akatosh's children, entitled by that birthright to consume the world and all things in it. Standing beside him, enforcing that dominion, was his younger brother. His name, in the dragon language, broke into 3 parts. Paarthurnax. Hold on to those words. We will need them later. To understand what Paarthurnax was before he was what we meet in Skyrim, you have to sit with the scale of what the Dragon War actually was. The records that survive, in fragments, in lore texts, in the half-mythologized accounts the Nords preserved across generations, describe a conflict that was not a war in any conventional sense. It was a subjugation. The dragons, under Alduin, ruled over the mortal peoples of Tamriel, not as distant conquerors, but as active, present tyrants. The dragon cult served them, worshipped them, and the price of that worship was real. People were not merely afraid of dragons. They lived under them, in the specific way that a civilization lives under a power it cannot challenge. Paarthurnax was Alduin's lieutenant in all of this. The word lieutenant appears in the records kept by the Blades, the ancient order of dragon hunters who eventually became the Imperial Intelligence Service. And it is a careful word, a military word, chosen when you want to convey both hierarchy and agency. He was not merely present at the atrocities, he participated. The Blades records note, with the particular flatness of language that comes when the person writing has run out of ways to express horror, that he committed unspeakable acts against mankind. Acts great enough to be remembered for thousands of years. Acts that the Blades, even in the Fourth Era when Alduin returns and the world is ending, considered unforgivable. It is worth pausing here, because there is a temptation in stories about redemption to make the past soft. To summarize, it quickly and move on to the better part. But the better part of Paarthurnax's story, and there is a better part genuinely, is only real if the earlier part is real. He was not a reluctant lieutenant who looked the other way while others did terrible things. He was Alduin's second in command in an era of domination that lasted for what the lore suggests was centuries. The world the early Nords lived in was, in no small part, shaped by what Paarthurnax helped maintain. There is something sitting in his most famous line of dialogue that becomes heavier the longer you hold it. When the Dragonborn finally reaches him, standing on his word wall in the snow, with his ruined horns and his ancient eyes, he does not offer a defense. He does not explain himself. He asks a question. What is better, to be born good or to overcome your evil nature through great effort? He is not posing a philosophical exercise. He is describing the only thing he has done for thousands of years. The Dragon War ended the way most long dominances end, not suddenly, but through accumulated resistance that reached a threshold. The Nords of Skyrim, pushed past the point of endurance, found a way to fight back. And the way they found was the one thing that should not have been possible. They learned to use the Thu'um. The accounts of how this happened are split, and the split between them is one of those fissures in Skyrim's lore that the game leaves deliberately unhealed. Paarthurnax himself, when the Dragonborn asks him directly, gives one answer. He says that it was Alduin's false claim of godhood that turned him, that watching Alduin declare himself not merely dominant, but divine, asserting lordship over Akatosh himself, positioning his own will above the order of creation, was the thing that finally broke his loyalty. That what moved him was not compassion for mortals, but a theological objection, a belief that Alduin had stepped outside the natural order and that following him further would be a betrayal of something older and more fundamental than brotherhood. Nordic legend gives a different account entirely. That version says it was not Paarthurnax's conscience that changed him. It was the goddess Kine, the Nordic aspect of Kinnereth, the divine of wind and sky, who intervened, who sent Paarthurnax to teach mankind the Thu'um, who was, in this reading, the actual cause of his betrayal, acting through him as an instrument rather than waiting for him to arrive at the decision on his own. These two versions have not been reconciled by the game. They sit alongside each other in the lore as competing truths, and the game does not come down on one side. What they represent, and this is what makes the ambiguity feel intentional rather than unresolved, is the nature of mythologized history. The same event looks different depending on whose theology you are reading it through. What neither account erases is the act itself. Paarthurnax taught the first tongues. 3 Nords named Germleth Goldenhilt, Hakon One-Eye, and Feldir the Old. He gave them access to the Thu'um, the language of dragons, the language of reality itself. And in doing so, he handed the people of Skyrim the only tool that could turn the tide of the Dragon War. There is no dispute about the fact of it. The motivation behind it is where the accounts diverge. But the thing he did, taking the most powerful gift his kind possessed and passing it deliberately to the people being crushed under his kind's rule, that part is settled. The Blades, it is worth noting, find this fact damning rather than exculpatory. Their logic, stated plainly by Delphine when she delivers her ultimatum to the Dragonborn, is this: someone who betrayed one master can betray another. The capacity for betrayal does not diminish with the goodness of the cause. A dragon who turned on Alduin proved he can turn on anyone. Not an irrational argument, just a cold one. And there is a detail buried further in the story of what happened after the war that changes how cold that argument actually is. We will reach it. Hold on to it. The Dragon War did not end cleanly. Even with the Thu'um, the 3 tongues could not destroy Alduin. They could wound him, ground him, strip him of flight long enough to close with him. That was what the Dragonrend shout was for, the shout they invented specifically to force a dragon to experience mortality, to feel finite. But destroying him entirely was beyond what any mortal weapon or voice could do. What they did instead was remove him from the world. Using an Elder Scroll, one of the ancient artifacts that exist outside of time, that contain and record fate without being bound by it. Feldir, the Old cast. Alduin forward through time. Not killed, not destroyed, displaced. Sent into the future to a point where a Dragonborn could face him again with the power to end him properly. Paarthurnax knew this. He knew that Alduin was not gone. He knew where Alduin had been sent, not to what year, but to the place. The throat of the world was where the ancient tongues had made their stand, the most sacred mountain in Skyrim, the site of the banishment, and it was where the World Eater would eventually return. So Paarthurnax stayed. He did not scatter with the other dragons after the war. He did not disappear into the mountains or go into hiding in remote corners of the world. He went to the place where Alduin would reappear, knowing it would happen, not knowing when. And he sat down to wait. For thousands of years. The other dragons were hunted to near extinction in the aftermath. The Akaviri, the people from the continent of Akavir who came to Tamriel in the First Era, were dedicated and systematic dragon hunters, and they reduced the dragon population to almost nothing over the course of that era. Paarthurnax survived this period under the protection first of the Greybeards and later of the Dragonborn emperors themselves. The Blades, who descended from those Akaviri hunters, wanted him dead for the entirety of their existence as an order. They never got to him, because for centuries the Dragonborn emperors shielded him. Tiber Septim, who would eventually be deified as Talos, who united Tamriel and founded the Third Empire, had walked the path to High Hrothgar as a young man in the Second Era. The Greybeards had spoken his name, and the world had shaken. They named him Ysmir, Dragon of the North, and Paarthurnax had been there, above High Hrothgar, waiting in the snow. When Tiber became emperor, the dragonborn line he established protected Paarthurnax from the blades for centuries that followed, not because they had forgotten what he was, because they had not. What the lore does not tell us is what those years felt like from the inside, whether the waiting was peaceful, whether the meditation was ever enough. He admits plainly and without self-pity that no day passes without temptation, that the will to power lives in him permanently, that he did not cure himself of what he was. He chose every single day not to act on it. "I have overcome my nature," he says, "only through meditation and long study of the way of the voice." Not cured, overcome, one day at a time, for thousands of years. But the way of the voice that gave him the framework for this, that gave the daily struggle a shape and a name, was not there when he first climbed to the summit. He had been practicing it alone, without the words for it, long before anyone built those words. Jurgen Windcaller, the man who founded the Greybeards, was not a peaceful man by nature. He was a warrior, one of the most powerful tongues, wielders of the voice as a weapon in the entire First Era. He used the Thu'um the way it had been used since the Dragon War ended, as a tool of conquest, a battering ram for Nordic expansion. The armies of the First Era were devastating in part because of men like Jurgen, who could shout down gates, who could shatter stone with a word, who embodied the idea that the power the ancient Nords had wrested from the dragons was theirs to use however they chose. And then the Nordic armies went to Red Mountain. The battle was a catastrophe. The Dwemer and the Keimer, the ancient elven peoples of Morrowind, annihilated the Nordic forces completely. It was not a defeat. It was an erasure. And Jurgen Windcaller, who had been one of the most powerful tongues of his age, spent 7 years in isolated meditation trying to understand what it meant. What he concluded was not that the Nords had been outmatched tactically. It was that they had been punished, that the gods had given the mortals of Skyrim the Thu'um as a gift, and the gift had been misused, that using the voice for conquest and personal glory was a perversion of what it was for, that the only legitimate use of the voice was for the worship and glory of the gods, not the elevation of men. This philosophy, the way of the voice, was not immediately accepted. Jurgen spent years convincing other tongues. The confrontation that settled the argument is one of the stranger and more striking moments in Elder Scrolls lore. Jurgen faced 17 other tongues at once, all of them using their shouts against him, and he absorbed those shouts for 3 days straight until his opponents were exhausted. Not by shouting louder, by taking the violence in and refusing to return it. The 17 tongues who had tried to outshout him became his first disciples. He built High Hrothgar on the throat of the world, and Paarthurnax, already waiting above in the snow, became the grand master of what Jurgen had created. There is something worth noticing in that sequence. Paarthurnax was already there. He had been on that mountain since the end of the Dragon War, before Jurgen was born, before the First Era had properly begun. What he found, when Jurgen built his monastery and his philosophy, was a framework for what he had already been doing alone, a language for the discipline he had been practicing without a name for it. The way of the voice arrived, and fit the shape of the life Paarthurnax had already been trying to build. But none of this, not the long wait, not the Greybeards, not the centuries of protection, not the meditation on fire, changes what his name means. And he never changed his name. This is the thing the lore puts in front of you without announcement. His name, in the dragon language, means ambition, overlord, cruelty, Paar, Paarthurnax. He did not change it. In all the time between the Dragon War and the arrival of the last Dragonborn in the Fourth Era, through the long meditation on the throat of the world, through the founding of the Greybeards, through the teaching of generations of tongues, through the centuries of protection under the Septim Emperors, through the visits to the captured dragon Numenex in Dragon's Reach, through the quiet and the cold and the endless practice of restraint, he kept that name. The name is a self-description. It is not someone else's name. It is the name he carried at the height of what he was, and he brought it forward into everything he tried to become. In a world where names carry real power, where the word for a thing and the thing itself are connected in ways that go beyond symbol, keeping that name is a choice. It is the choice to remain in contact with the worst version of yourself, to refuse the comfort of a new identity, to say, "This is what I was, and I am not done accounting for it, and a new name would let me pretend otherwise." The Blades look at Paarthurnax and see a war criminal who has not paid for his crimes. The Greybeards look at him and see a master who has spent millennia in service of a philosophy of peace. The Dragonborn, standing in the snow at the top of the world, gets to decide which frame to hold. But neither the Blades nor the Greybeards notice the name. Or if they notice, they don't say it. The lore leaves it in front of you quietly, the way the game often does with its most important things, without announcement, without instruction. Just there, in the dragon language, waiting for someone to look. Ambition, overlord, cruelty. That is what he carried. Through everything, that is what he kept. Now think back to the long wait. Think about what it means to sit with that name every day, to meditate on fire with that name still on you, to teach younger dragons the way of the voice while that name is still yours. He did not earn a better name. He chose to keep the one that told the truth. When Alduin returned, displaced forward through time by the Elder Scroll, arriving in the Fourth Era at the beginning of the main events of Skyrim, he came back to the throat of the world. Of course, he did. He knew where he had been banished from. He knew who was waiting there. The meeting between the two brothers, when the last Dragonborn finally reaches the summit and Alduin arrives, is recorded in the game's dialogue as genuinely strange in its restraint. Alduin did not attack immediately. He spoke. He noted, with the particular cruelty of someone who wants you to feel it, that Paarthurnax had weakened over the millennia of peace, that the choice to meditate rather than dominate had cost him in real, measurable ways, that all the stillness had made him less. He offered one final time to let his younger brother come back, to rejoin him, to be on the side that was about to win. Paarthurnax refused, not with a speech, not with a long philosophical argument. He refused, and then he fought his brother in the air above the throat of the world to buy the Dragonborn time. It was not a fair fight. Alduin was right that Paarthurnax had weakened. He had spent thousands of years choosing not to exercise the part of himself that would have kept him powerful, and it had cost him. He could not have defeated Alduin alone. He knew that. He did not try to. He bought time instead. He used the diminished version of himself, the one that all those years of restraint had left him, as a shield between the World Eater and the only person in the world with the power to actually end what was coming. He knew what it would cost him to fight. He did it anyway. Not a villain, not a saint. A brother who chose one more time to be on the right side of something, even when the right side was weaker. After Alduin's defeat, after the last Dragonborn returns from Sovngarde, Paarthurnax says something that tends to get lost in the noise of the ending. He grieves. He does not celebrate. He does not express relief. He says, in the particular way that someone says something they have made peace with, but not gotten over, that he is not glad Alduin is dead. That Alduin was still his brother. That what was necessary and what was good are not always the same thing. And then he says what he intends to do next. He is going to find the remaining dragons that Alduin resurrected. The ones still scattered across Skyrim and Tamriel, confused and violent and newly awake in a world that has spent centuries hunting their kind. He is going to try to teach them the way of the voice. This is either the most naive thing in the entire game or the most quietly devastating detail in it. Because Paarthurnax knows better than anyone what dragons are made of. He knows the will to power lives in them permanently because it lives in him permanently, and he has spent thousands of years managing it with only partial success. He knows that many of those dragons will refuse. Some will not survive the attempt. He is going to try anyway. The particular texture of that decision, the willingness to offer to others the thing that cost you so much to practice yourself, knowing most of them will reject it, is the kind of thing that does not have a single name in any language. It is not quite hope. It is not quite grief. It is the behavior of someone who has decided the effort is worth making even when the outcome cannot be guaranteed, and who does not need the guarantee in order to make the effort. A small girl in the village of Rorikstead sometimes tells people about a dream she had. A good dragon, she says, old and grey, not scary. The lore does not explain this. It offers no connection. It just lets it sit there, in a child's voice, in a town far from any mountain. There is a moment in the Paarthurnax questline that tends to get discussed in terms of the choice: blades or greybeards, kill him or spare him, and almost never in terms of what Paarthurnax does when he learns the Dragonborn has received the ultimatum. He does not argue. He does not plead. He does not say, with any heat at all, that the blades are wrong. He says they are not wrong. He acknowledges, clearly and without deflection, that the blades are wise not to trust him, that he would not trust another dove either. He says that dragons were made to dominate, that the will to power is in the blood, and he says it not to excuse himself, but to explain why the blade's caution makes complete sense. He gives the Dragonborn no argument for keeping him alive that he did not earn. And then he asks the question he has been living inside for thousands of years. What is better, to be born good, or to overcome your evil nature through great effort? The question is genuinely open. He does not telegraph the answer. He does not say, therefore spare me, because I am the second kind. He asks, and he goes quiet, and the choice belongs entirely to the person standing in front of him. The Greybeards argue for his life with the fervor of people whose entire philosophy was shaped by him. Arngeir, when told what the blades are asking, calls it a mindless vendetta. He says that Paarthurnax's noble spirit, his wisdom, everything he has built, would all be gone. And for what? Ancient justice for crimes committed before most of the current world existed. The blades are not wrong on the facts. Paarthurnax committed the atrocities. Thousands of years of meditation do not bring back the people who were killed. The law does not pretend otherwise, and neither does Paarthurnax. What the game offers, in the end, is not a resolution. It is a question about the nature of justice and the nature of change, pressed into the shape of a choice, and it lands the way the best choices in games land, with consequence on both sides and no clean escape. If you kill him, Arngeir turns you away. The relationship with the Greybeards is severed. The man who guided you through the mysteries of the voice will not look at you. If you spare him, Delphine will not speak to you further. The blades. The people who first helped you find Alduin, who reconstructed the prophecy of the Dragonborn, will treat you as someone who chose wrong. There is no option in the game to convince Delphine otherwise. No dialogue path that reconciles the two. You can leave the quest unfinished, walk away from it, let it sit incomplete in your journal forever. But if you want both, the game does not allow it. One lore community discussion notes that this is one of the only quests in Skyrim that cannot be talked around or resolved through persuasion mechanics. The game simply will not let the choice disappear. Some players have been leaving that quest unfinished since the game launched. 14 years of unfinished business, sitting in a journal on a frozen mountain. Paarthurnax has a habit that is easy to overlook. When he teaches the Dragonborn to meditate on shouts, to contemplate the words of power at a deeper level and draw additional meaning from them, he demonstrates the practice by sitting before his own word wall and doing it himself, right in front of you, not as a performance. He does this whether you are there or not. He was doing it before you arrived, and he will return to it when you leave. The word wall at the summit contains words of the fire breath shout. It is the first thing Paarthurnax teaches the Dragonborn when they reach him. The most ancient and instinctive expression of dragon power. He demonstrates it deliberately and precisely, and then he stops and he sits back down in front of the words, and he resumes meditating on the thing that just came out of him. He meditates on fire. He has been meditating on fire for thousands of years. The thing he fights hardest is also the thing he chooses to sit with most closely. He does not run from the instinct. He studies it. He sits in the presence of the most dangerous part of himself and learns its contours so thoroughly that he cannot be surprised by it. Not to perform it, to know it. There is something in that practice. The choice to be intimate with your worst tendencies rather than distant from them, that the lore never quite names but keeps showing in the shape of his daily life. He also visited Numenex, the captured dragon imprisoned in Dragon's Reach, the one whose skull still hangs in the Great Hall of Whiterun in the Fourth Era as a trophy and a warning. Paarthurnax recalls in a single piece of in-game dialogue that Numenex was so disturbed by his captivity and so profoundly isolated that he could no longer remember his own name. He had lost it. Paarthurnax visited his imprisoned kin, saw what that kind of loss looks like from the inside, and then returned to his chosen solitude at the summit and kept choosing it anyway. He knew what losing yourself looked like. He stayed near the fire and kept his own name. The one that means cruelty. There are two ways the story ends, and neither of them feels like victory. If Paarthurnax survives, if the Dragonborn walks away from the Blade's demand or leaves the quest sitting incomplete, then after Alduin's defeat, in the final moments of the main quest line, he appears one last time at the exterior of High Hrothgar. He grieves for his brother, clearly and without apology. And then he says he is going. That there are dragons out there, newly awake and violent, and that he intends to find them. He flies off into the sky of Skyrim. If you return to the throat of the world, he is there again, on the word wall, exactly where he always was. The game's mechanics cannot quite hold the scale of what he intends, but the intention is real. If Paarthurnax is killed, if the Dragonborn climbs the mountain one final time with the Blade's request still accepted, Arngir's response is one of the most genuinely wounded pieces of dialogue in the game. His philosophy of compassion, tested at its most fundamental point. The ancient record of the Dragon War, in the Blade's accounting, closed, and the summit is empty. The word wall is still there, the snow is still falling, the fire breath words are still carved into the stone, but nothing is sitting in front of them. The mountain is just a mountain again. Both outcomes carry a specific kind of loss, which is unusual for a binary choice in a game. Keeping Paarthurnax alive does not feel like winning. It feels like continuation, the stubborn, costly piece that has to be renewed every day, passed to someone else to carry. Killing him does not feel like justice, even if you are convinced he deserved it. It feels like the ending of something that was difficult and rare, and took thousands of years to reach. One lore discussion from the UESP community records a statement attributed to ESO lore master Michael Zenker, suggesting that Paarthurnax's death may be the canonical outcome, but this interpretation is contested within the community, and the Elder Scrolls series has not confirmed it in any subsequent game. What exists in that space is uncertainty, which the lore of Skyrim has always been willing to inhabit without resolving. There is a version of the story in which Paarthurnax spends the rest of his very long life flying to dragons who will probably not listen, spending himself down in a purpose he cannot guarantee will come to anything. There is a version in which the mountain is empty. The game gives you the choice and the weight of it. It does not tell you which one is more true. He sits at the top of the world and does not move. You know this now from the inside. You know that the stillness is not rest. You know what it costs. That beneath the wings ragged at the edges, beneath the dulled eyes and the chipped horns, something is always pressing, always present, and that the choice to sit rather than act is not the absence of force, but the presence of it, directed entirely inward, every single day, without exception, without witness, without the guarantee that it will always hold. The mountains were here before. He chose this. They will be here after. But for however many thousands of years, this mountain has had him on it, arguing with himself in the cold, meditating on fire, waiting for a brother who was always going to come back eventually, teaching what he knew to people who would live and die and be replaced by other people who would live and die. He chose it. Not because the nature he was fighting was small, not because the name was easy to carry, because what is better is not always what is simple. And sometimes the most honest thing you can do with the worst name you have ever been given is refuse to put it down. Refuse to pretend you have outgrown what it describes. Sit with it in the cold and keep working. He kept working. There is something in that, if you let yourself sit with it before sleep. The idea that the longest wars are sometimes the ones no one else can see. The ones fought against the interior. The ones measured not in victories, but in the decision to try again tomorrow, and the day after that, without a final answer and without an end. You might know what that is like. Not in the scale of a dragon, not across thousands of years, but in the particular ordinary way that a person who knows their own worst tendencies decides, again, not to be ruled by them today. He chose to be worth the choice, whether anyone gave him the chance to prove it. If you found something in this story tonight, if it helped you rest, or gave you something to carry quietly into sleep, please consider subscribing to Sleepable Gaming Lore, and leave a like if you feel moved to. It helps more people find their way here, and this channel is built entirely on stories like this one. The snow is still falling on the throat of the world. He is still there, still on the word wall, still in front of the firewords, still working on the same thing he has been working on since before your civilization had a name. The first flame quickly fades, but the one who chose to sit with it, the one who learned its name and kept his own, that one burns low and steady, in the cold at the top of the world, in the dark. Take your time. There is nowhere you need to be tonight.